Hello, bonjour, Kwe. I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the traditional territory that is unceded of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. I want to thank you very much for being here this evening. You will see that there is a large group gathered here with me. There are cabinet and caucus colleagues, and also some faces that may not be familiar to many of the reporters here in the room or the people that are watching on television. I wanted to acknowledge each of them because it is important. Leanne MacDonald is here from the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. Mohamed Hashim is here from the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. Richard Marceau is here from the Centre for Israel and Jewish Affairs. Rizwan Mohammed is here from the National Council of Canadian Muslims. You're going to hear from the two brave women who are beside me, Jane and Carla. They're all here because they understand the importance of the legislation, the Online Harms Act, Bill C-63, that I just introduced today at first reading in the House of Commons. Thank you all for being here. All of us expect to be safe in our homes, in our neighborhoods, and in our communities. We should be able to expect the same kind of safety in our online communities. Nous voulons tous que nos enfants et petits-enfants puissent parler à leurs amis, jouer, regarder des vidéos et apprendre en ligne, mais nous voulons aussi qu'ils soient en sécurité. Cela signifie les protéger de l'exploitation sexuelle, du harcèlement, de la haine et du harcèlement. Cela signifie des conséquences pour ceux qui enfreignent la loi en ligne. Cela signifie que les plateformes de médias sociaux soient tenues de rendre des comptes. Cela signifie également déposer d'un environnement sûr pour un débat en ligne robuste pour ceux qui veulent s'engager. But we all know that our online world falls well short of the basic standards that I just mentioned. Bad actors target our most vulnerable, our children. They spread vile hate and encourage impressionable people to commit violence. We know the harms we experience online can have real-world impacts, with tragic, sometimes fatal, consequences. And yet, so much of this goes unchecked. I will explain what C-63 will do to make our online world safer, but it is important for Canadians, including the Canadians watching right now, to understand why we are doing this. I know why I'm here before you today. I'm the father of two youngsters, and like parents and grandparents around Canada, I'm terrified by the dangers that lurk on the internet for our children. We have rigorous safety standards for things like my son's Lego at home. Yet somehow, none for the most dangerous toy, not just in my home, but every Canadian home, the screen that is in front of our children's faces. I'm also a Muslim. The hatred that festers online is radicalizing people, and that radicalization has real-world impacts for my community and for so many other communities. Look no further than the killing of 4 members of the Afzal family, which a court in Ontario just last week described, and I quote, as a textbook act of terrorism, end quote. So there are many reasons for me and my parliamentary colleagues to take action today, but I do not want you to hear only from me. I want you to hear why this work is urgent from people who have experienced the worst of the internet, the trauma of child exploitation, or the pain of being subjected to hate and vilification. Despite their personal traumas, Jane and Carla have bravely come here today to share their stories in the hope that through our shared work, none of you, your kids, or your grandkids will have to go through what they did. I want to invite Jane to come to the podium and say a few words. But before she begins, I want to caution people that are watching online and caution the people that are in this room right now that her story deals with a very difficult but very important subject matter. Jane?
Thank you, Minister, for your warm introduction. My name is Jane. I'm a mother whose little girl has been sexually abused and on account of the abuse has also become a victim of sexual exploitation. I'd also like to acknowledge and state that I may be one mother, but one of countless, who could be standing here and sharing their stories with all of you. I want to let you know how burdensome sharing my daughter's story will actually be for me. I'd like to provide some insight and perhaps describe a few details of the horrific sexual abuse my little girl has had to endure. Her life since the abuse has been far from manageable. The unending pain and trauma completely engulfs every part of her body. She was just a toddler when one day evil stamped itself upon her, just a young child that had no choice but to solely entrust her life to the hands of an adult who was supposed to protect her from harm, teach her right from wrong, and love her in such a manner that cultivated and enforced a future of what a healthy relationship was supposed to look like. In her preschool to kindergarten years, she was told or taught to believe that sex or sexual actions between children and grown-ups was completely acceptable and normal. Some days, instead of watching cartoons, she would spend her time with a presumably trusted adult who normalized child pornographic material. This normalization took place by subjecting her to possibly hundreds of child exploitation videos repeatedly at any opportune moment. With the help of various child sexual abuse material, she was deliberately raped by her abuser over and over again. Based on evidence collected by law enforcement, it could possibly be determined that she was raped and sexually assaulted on a daily basis. She was between the ages of anywhere from 3 to 6 years old, raped in such a way that she was instructed to believe that this was normal. To prevent her from telling anyone, her abuser told her that it was just their little secret. Quite often, she was bribed with candy as well. When this initial abuser was caught, they admitted the abuse had spiraled out of control. They had become desensitized to child rape themselves, child sexual abuse material. They admitted they were always hungry for more. My child's understanding of what happened to them is greater than they wish they could remember. The extent of the damage that was done to her in the moment and that continues in the present is incalculable. My little girl has countless flashbacks that haunt her while she sleeps. She is anxious and scared. She is unable to even leave the house alone. She is fearful of people. The abuse that happened to her is in hyperactive state and is continuously traded and is known as a series of child sexual abuse material that is circulating on the internet. Child predators have saved and shared images and videos of her tiny body lying naked and contorted in inappropriate ways. Her privates are no longer private. Her smile, her laughter, and her innocence have all been taken from her. How she is portrayed in those pictures and videos is not how she wants to be perceived. She says to me, "That little girl is dead." All the child molesters, pedophiles, and their associates who take it upon themselves to download, view, save, and share my child's inappropriate pedophilia abuse material have taken part in murdering her. Yes, murder. She refers to it as murder because the perpetrators blatantly premeditated their motives and actions against her. Those individuals that possess her child sexual abuse products should be held accountable and take full moral responsibility. Because of people like them, she has secluded herself from enjoyment of a fulfilled life. This is the only coping mechanism she believes she has to protect herself. She feels that she is damaged beyond repair. She wants the abusive material to vanish. She mentions that even when she is truly dead, the material will still be somewhere in existence. The evolution of technology is her nemesis. She cannot escape the abuse, nor can the abuse escape her. My child has suffered in silence for far too long. She should not be ashamed. Neither should she feel guilty of the personal attack that takes place on the uncontrolled internet. My little girl is everything. As her mother, I've made the decision to remove my protective layer to fight for her. I am her advocate as well as her voice. She never had a choice as a child. She has been illegally trafficked on the internet. Her CSAM runs rampant all over the internet. My little girl is not solely a victim of hands-on offending. She is re-victimized every single time her child sexual abuse material surfs throughout the dark web. Canadians care about their children. They have been put in an unwanted place where they have no control, and no control over how their children's lives are damaged by the weaponized use of technology. Does Canada not have a responsibility to protect the future of our children? Should my child be a slave to fear for the rest of her life? Fear is the cause of my child's paralyzed future. At what expense do Canadians prioritize their so-called freedom? I am standing here today because we need a culture of lawfulness that strongly enforces internet regulation. The unregulated internet has damaged my child and countless children across the country.
Thank you, Jane, for being here and for having the courage to share your story and your family's story. And I'll say to you quite candidly that it is those kinds of stories that inspire us to do the work that is necessary today. As Leanna from the Canadian Centre for Child Protection can tell you, Jane's story is unfortunately not actually unique. It is shocking what is available online. Protecting our kids, all kids, from this kind of abuse and exploitation is what governments must do, and we will do that. Malheureusement, ceci n'est qu'un des défis auxquels nous sommes confrontés. La haine se répand en ligne. Elle se propage dans le monde entier en un instant à des millions de personnes. Elle s'installe sur nos plateformes de médias sociaux et cible les plus vulnérables. Je voudrais inviter Carla à venir au podium à raconter son histoire. Carla?
Bonjour. Donc, my name is Carla Beauvais, and I will humbly share my story with you. I take the stand today knowing that it is my duty to talk and not be silenced anymore. Mon histoire n'est pas unique, au contraire. Mon histoire est celle de tant de femmes qui sont traquées sur les réseaux sociaux et qu'on tente de réduire au silence à tout prix parce qu'elles défendent des idéaux de justice sociale. On parle de haine en ligne, on parle de violence. Tout ça est un peu abstrait jusqu'au jour où on y fait face. Il y a des moments dans la vie, où la vie vous confronte à des épreuves que vous n'auriez jamais imaginées. Des moments qui vous laissent à bout de souffle. Des moments où votre foi en l'humanité est mise à rude épreuve. Pour moi, ce moment a été lorsque j'ai été submergée par une vague de haine en ligne à l'été 2020. Je suis une militante dans l'âme. Je croyais avoir en moi tout ce qu'il fallait comme force intérieure pour faire face à toute adversité. Mais rien ne pouvait me préparer à la violence, à la misogynie noire et au racisme dont j'ai été vécue. Rien. Après le lancement de l'application HOP, un projet imaginé avec 3 amis destiné à soutenir les entrepreneurs noirs en pleine pandémie, j'ai été la cible de deux éditorialistes. Suite à leurs récits diffamatoires, j'ai été submergée par un déluge de messages haineux et racistes. Ce harcèlement a pris la forme d'insultes racistes, de menaces et d'appels téléphoniques parfois terrifiants. J'ai été traitée de tous les noms. On m'a ordonné de rentrer chez moi. On a utilisé le mot en haine à volonté pour me déshumaniser. J'ai même été confrontée à une plainte pour incitation à la haine raciale, une accusation absurde et offensante. Le moment de bascule pour moi a été la nuit où un homme m'a appelée en me disant qu'il connaissait mon adresse et qu'il allait régler mon cas. Lorsqu'il a prononcé les 3 numéros de mon adresse et le nom de ma rue, tout s'est écroulé autour de moi. Vous ne pouvez pas imaginer la peur, l'anxiété et le stress qui m'ont habité. Pendant au moins 3 mois, je ne suis pas sortie de chez moi. Un double confinement physique et mental. Imaginez la scène. Moi, une mère monoparentale, vivant seule avec sa fille de 3 ans, aux prises avec cette tempête de haine qui redoute le moment où un homme pourrait surgir de nulle part pour l'attaquer. Et qu'est-ce qui pourrait arriver à ma fille? Je me suis fait tant de scénarios, j'étais complètement démunie. Face à cette haine inexpliquée, j'ai choisi de m'effacer, de disparaître et de vivre cette souffrance en silence. Je me suis retirée de la sphère publique et des médias sociaux. J'ai dû renoncer à une partie de moi-même. Cela m'a pris 8 mois avant de pouvoir en parler publiquement. C'est grâce à la campagne Bloquons la haine initiée par le YMCA et la Fondation canadienne des relations raciales que j'ai pu me réapproprier ma voix, partager mon histoire et dénoncer les actes que j'avais vécus. Je ne remercierai jamais assez Mohamed Hachim de m'avoir donné cette plateforme. Elle m'a permis de me libérer. La misogynie noire, cette intersection entre le sexisme et le racisme, m'a frappée de plein fouet. En tant que femme noire, je suis doublement vulnérable à la violence en ligne, qui trouve ses racines dans des systèmes d'oppression profondément enracinés. Mon histoire, c'est celle de Tamara Termitus, d'Émilie Nicolas, de Vanessa Destinée, de Dominique Anglade, de Dominique Olivier, de Claudine Gay, d'Anastasia Marcelin, d'Anami Paul, de Leslie Willis, de Leslie Lewis, mais aussi celle de tant de femmes qui vivent leur détresse dans l'obscurité, loin des projecteurs. Je veux que vous sachiez que nous ne sommes pas que des victimes, mais surtout des survivantes. La violence en ligne brise des vies dans le réel. Elle dépasse le cadre virtuel. Ces attaques, qui sont pour la plupart du temps impunies, ont des impacts psychologiques énormes. Il ne faut pas banaliser ces actes, car la haine est aussi précurseur de violence. Aujourd'hui, j'ai la chance d'être devant vous et de partager mon histoire et de mettre un visage humain sur les effets de cette haine qui ne diminue pas et qui prend de plus en plus d'ampleur. Mais combien n'ont pas cette chance? Combien de vies ont été brisées? Combien ont abdiqué? Combien nous ont quittés? Le projet de loi déposé aujourd'hui n'est que le début d'une série d'actions nécessaires qui, je l'espère, nous protégeront de ce fléau qu'est la haine en ligne et sensibilisera la population sur ses effets dévastateurs. La haine est une menace pour notre sécurité, notre démocratie et nos droits en tant que Canadiens et Canadiennes. La liberté d'expression ne devrait jamais être érigée comme droit fondamental quand elle détruit des vies. Ma vie a basculé depuis 2020 et je ne crois pas que je pourrais être complètement guérie des traumatismes que je porte encore en moi. Mais la journée d'aujourd'hui me donne espoir. Espoir que la banalisation et l'impunité de la haine en ligne ne seront plus acceptées. Et j'aimerais rajouter, hors de mon texte écrit, que prendre la parole aujourd'hui pour moi est un acte nécessaire, pour ma fille. C'est grâce à elle que j'ai été capable de passer à travers ce que j'ai vécu, mais aussi dire à toutes les femmes noires qui vivent ces moments, de ne pas rester silencieuses. Pour moi, le projet de loi aujourd'hui nous donne des munitions, nous donne la possibilité de pouvoir comprendre qu'on n'est pas seul et qu'il y a des gens qui sont là pour nous défendre. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Carla, pour vos mots, pour votre courage et pour votre message sincère et direct. Mesdames et messieurs, ces deux histoires expliquent pourquoi nous légiférons. Ces deux femmes et leurs familles ont été victimes de préjudices et le recours était insuffisant. Les préjudices qu'elles ont subis persistent. Le gouvernement doit agir. This is what the Online Harms Act will do. Under this bill, major online services will have three overarching obligations: a duty to protect children, a duty to act responsibly, and the duty to remove the most egregious content. This bill targets the worst of what we see online: content that sexually victimizes children or re-victimizes survivors, intimate content shared without consent, content that incites violence, extremism, or terrorism, content that incites violence or foments hatred, and content that is used to bully a child or induce a child to self-harm. This bill will establish a new Digital Safety Commission to make sure that online services comply with their new obligations, as well as an ombudsperson to advocate for users and victims of online harm. Nous savons que la haine prolifère malheureusement en ligne au Canada. De nombreux groupes sont ciblés par cette haine. Le projet de loi C-63 apporte également des modifications à la législation existante pour adresser ceci. Il modifie le code criminel en créant une nouvelle infraction autonome de crime haineux. Il intègre dans le code une définition de la haine basée sur la jurisprudence de la Cour suprême du Canada. Il augmente les peines maximales pour toutes les infractions existantes liées à la propagande haineuse. Il créera un nouvel engagement de ne pas troubler la paix publique pour donner aux personnes un outil supplémentaire pour prévenir la commission des crimes haineux ou infractions liées à la propagande haineuse. Le projet de loi modifie également la loi canadienne sur les droits de la personne pour permettre au nouveau aux individus de déposer des plaintes concernant des discours haineux en ligne auprès de la Commission canadienne des droits de la personne. Il modernise et comble les lacunes dans la loi concernant la déclaration obligatoire afin d'aider les forces de l'ordre à enquêter de manière plus efficace sur les abus sexuels et l'exploitation des enfants et de traduire en auteur en justice. But I want to be crystal clear about what the Online Harms Act does not do. It does not undermine freedom of speech. It enhances free expression by empowering all people to safely participate in online debate. Je tiens à préciser ce que le projet de loi C-63 ne fait pas. Il ne sert pas la liberté d'expression. Il renforce la liberté d'expression en permettant à toutes les personnes de participer en toute sécurité au débat en ligne. This bill empowers adults. Right now, where your posts go and what appears in your feed are dictated by platforms. Through this bill, we are restoring more of that power to you, the individual Canadian. C-63, this bill does not wade in to your private communications. Private communications are exempted from this legislation. We know that there are powerful organizations and people who may line up against this legislation. People with money and people with influence. My message to these people and these organizations is very simple. It is now the time to work directly with us. Profit cannot be prioritized over safety. Right now, it is too easy for social media companies to look the other way as hate and exploitation festers on their platforms. This bill will require platforms to do their part and to do better to keep people safe from harm and exploitation, especially our children. Failure to do so will have a price, significant monetary penalties. This legislation does not come out of a vacuum. All of us standing here today know that it is a result of years, literally years of hard work, research and consultation with stakeholders, with experts, with international partners and average Canadians who are concerned about the well-being of their families, their neighbors, and their communities. The message that all of those people have sent to us is loud and it is unequivocal. Doing nothing is not an option. They are absolutely right. We join allies like the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Australia, who have also legislated in this area. We have learned from their experiences. We cannot tolerate anarchy on the internet. The cost is too great. The safety, the mental health, and even the lives of our kids and our most vulnerable are at stake. I'm confident with the Online Harms Act in law, we can build safe online communities where our kids can flourish, where illegal hate is contained, and where citizens can fully engage in rigorous debate without fear of being targeted by threats, by violence, or by hatred. This work is just beginning. It is a long path ahead, and I have no doubt there will be challenges. But I believe, along with the people standing right behind me, that this cause is worth it. I would be happy to take your questions.
Minister, can you take us through the thinking of extending the maximum sentence on inciting genocide to life in prison? Is that too much?
What I would say to you is that we put a lot of thought into many aspects of this bill. There's an aspect that deals with the commission that's being created, and there's aspects that deal with the criminal law. We are creating a new freestanding hate crime offense. We are enhancing the penalties, as you mentioned, for the hate crime offenses that exist currently. And we're also ensuring that a peace bond could be procured for somebody who there's a reasonable likelihood will create a hate crimes offense. With respect to genocide, what I know as a lawyer, as minister, and what I've learned from the stakeholders and the experts whom we have consulted is that there is a determination to demonstrate at the highest level that the maximum penalty for a crime such as advocating or promoting genocide should be increased. That penalty, as it stands right now, when you proceed by way of what's called an indictable offense, is 5 years. We are saying that at a maximum, that should be elevated to 25 years. There will remain a range that's available to the judge that is disposing of the case, that is a range that it can reach as high as 25 years. It will depend on the context, but there's no doubt in my mind, particularly now where we are as a country, that people who advocate genocide need to understand that that is a very serious matter, and that is a matter that could be penalized at the highest level.
How did you determine the 24-hour takedown rule would only be for child sex abuse images as well as the non-consensual sharing of images? Like, how did you kind of arrive that those two were the ones that you keep that in there for?
Yeah. So we literally consulted upon this, and you and other journalists in this room have asked me, Minister, where's the bill? You've been working on it for a long time. And you're right, we did work on it for a long time because we had to get it right. So we heard from those extensive consultations over literally years about the different types of content that we need to address, and there were 7 in total. And what we heard is that you need to look at international examples. Australia had tried a takedown provision across many types of content. Germany had done that across the board. They've since resiled from that and moderated their position to move to what's called a risk-based analysis. But what we heard is that we need to address certain types of content, but for the 2 that you mentioned, the issue of child sexual exploitation material and the non-consensual sharing of intimate images, what is known as revenge porn, so that we can be clear with Canadians, is that there's no space. There's no tolerance in the public domain for that kind of material, and that kind of material needs to be brought down immediately.
Vous avez exclué le contenu pornographique de votre projet de loi, comme ce que propose la sénatrice Méville-Deschênes avec S210. Pourquoi ça ne fait pas partie de votre projet de loi?
Mais je ne suis pas d'accord avec la question de tout, parce que notre projet de loi touche l'exploitation des enfants d'une façon sexuelle. Ça touche la pornographie sexuelle que Jane vient de mentionner, qui a touché sa famille d'une façon directement. Et
la pornographie régulière ne serait pas touchée par votre projet de loi, je me trompe?
Non. Donc, ce qui est dans, c'est un grand projet de loi, je comprends, il y a beaucoup de détails là-dedans, mais ce qu'on vise avec ce propre projet de loi, c'est le fait qu'il faut protéger nos enfants. Donc, premier objectif. Comment on protège les enfants? C'est qu'on va créer une nouvelle responsabilité vis-à-vis les plateformes. Ceci dit que vous avez une duty to protect children, une obligation à protéger les enfants. Okay? Deuxième chose. En termes de détails qui est dans le projet de loi comme tel, c'est un aspect où il faut promouvoir les mesures pour créer ou manufacturer des sites ou des plateformes qui sont appropriés pour un âge, age-appropriate design features. Ceci dit que c'est une conversation qu'il faut avoir, comment régler l'Internet et les sites web et les plateformes pour qu'ils puissent être appropriés pour les enfants, parce que c'est les enfants qu'il faut protéger. Donc c'est ça qui est dans notre propre projet de loi.
This doesn't apply to private messages, Discord, Snapchat, WhatsApp, and a lot of AI deepfakes or non-consensual images are shared there. Are you going to miss a lot of this because of that provision?
So what I would say to you is that, first of all, with respect to deepfakes, we thought about this, and in the intervening 2 or 3 years when we've been discussing and consulting about this, the emergence of AI has literally come to the forefront, showing how dynamic the internet is. And what we've done is we've legislated specifically in this bill the notion of deepfakes being included specifically in the context of intimate images that are being shared without consent. For the Canadians that are watching, think about what transpired 4 weeks ago with Taylor Swift. It's her head superimposed on a nude body. That is the same essence of what we are trying to address. We will address that, and that is included in the legislation. With respect to your specific question, what I would say to you is that we heard about the nature of what had been done in some of those other countries that moved earlier than us on this very issue. And what we heard loudly and clearly, specifically in the context of the British debate that related to encrypted communications, is that they wanted to pierce that type of communication and address even that through their online safety bill. And they received a lot of negative feedback about the specific challenge that could have for freedom of expression. What I would say to Canadians that are listening right now is that I have listened. Our government has listened. Where we were 3 years ago, to Stephanie's question, is that we were in a different spot where we thought we would identify categories and have takedowns across the board. What we've done is reflected on that, on the critical importance of enhancing freedom of expression and promoting freedom of expression and ensuring that we calibrate this. And we are doing this now in a very measured and appropriate manner that addresses the harms as we see them, but ensures that Canadians' private communications will be exempt from this legislation.
Pourquoi est-ce que les messages qui incitent à la haine et les messages, par exemple, qui incitent au terrorisme, pourquoi est-ce que ces messages-là ne doivent pas être retirés en dedans de 24 heures? Pourquoi est-ce que ces messages-là peuvent rester finalement sur les médias sociaux?
Donc vous parlez de haine, le terrorisme?
Haine, terrorisme, tous les catégories qui ne font pas partie des 2 catégories là, qui sont visées par le retrait de 24 heures.
Donc première réponse, c'est qu'on a entendu ce que les experts, ce que les Canadiens, ce que les gens veulent. Ce qu'ils nous ont dit, c'est qu'il faut réfléchir, il faut avoir un système qui est un peu différent vis-à-vis ce type de sujet-là. Ceci dit, c'est important de combattre le terrorisme, évidemment, l'incitation à la violence, c'est sûr, mais c'est qu'il faut avoir un système où il y a une responsabilité qui est là sur les plateformes. Ceci dit, c'est-à-dire le duty a responsibility to protect. D'autres choses, c'est qu'il faut avoir une obligation sur eux qu'il faut promulguer effectivement un digital safety plan, donc une plan pour leur sécurité en ligne. Après ça, il faut actuellement utiliser les techniques pour modérer les risques et aussi il faut rendre compte d'une façon annuelle vis-à-vis la nouvelle commission comment ça fonctionne, est-ce que ça fonctionne ou non. Ceci dit, c'est que ce système-là va assurer en même temps qu'on a une liberté d'expression qui est essentielle dans une démocratie, mais en même temps, on va viser le contenu qui est dangereux, préjudiciable, de harmful content, dans des catégories comme vous venez de mentionner. C'est de cette façon-là, on a fait un équilibre entre les 2 objectifs d'une façon mesurée et appropriée. Tout à fait, on va sauvegarder la liberté d'expression, mais aussi on va assurer la sécurité des peuples canadiens.
Quelle est la différence entre la nouvelle infraction que vous ajoutez au Code criminel concernant la haine et l'ancien article 13 qui avait été source de beaucoup de critiques? Comment vous avez changé l'approche?
OK, donc c'est 2 enjeux assez différents. Donc, vis-à-vis l'article 13 sur le droit, le droit des personnes du Canada, ce projet de loi, the Canada Human Rights Act, cela, c'est une solution du niveau civil pour faire une plainte vis-à-vis la haine qui est distribuée d'une façon numérique contre une personne qui est touchée par une ground of discrimination, une catégorie qui est déjà dans nos propres lois. L'aspect du code criminel, c'est un plus large aspect où on touche le code criminel, où il y a un standard différent vis-à-vis le standard dans le contexte criminel, c'est beyond a reasonable doubt. Il y a des pénalités, les punitions, les fines ou aussi une sentence pénale qui peut être là-dedans. Mais aussi, la chose très importante pour comprendre pour les Canadiens, c'est qu'avec ce nouveau crime dans le code criminel de la haine en général, c'est que ça touche n'importe quel autre aspect du code criminel. Donc, s'il y a un aspect de haine vis-à-vis un vol, vis-à-vis un assaut, vis-à-vis un viol, par exemple, il y a un aspect où les policiers, la couronne et le juge peuvent décider de poursuivre une personne de ce crime au début. Maintenant, la seule solution qu'on a, il y a 2. Il y a un aspect où, lorsqu'on fait, je m'excuse, c'est un peu difficile en français, mais mischief to property, donc un crime vis-à-vis la propriété, un endroit, un édifice, on peut déclarer ça comme un aspect qui touche la haine, ou si on est rendu coupable à la fin, on peut décider qu'il y a un facteur grave qu'on a ajouté, que c'était motivé par la haine. Maintenant, on ajoute une utile qui était demandée même par les personnes qui sont derrière de moi maintenant, qu'il faut avoir un autre aspect, un autre freestanding propre section d'un crime de la haine qui peuvent être au début de le procès, d'aborder comme sujet et influencer comment ça se déroule dans le procès. Donc c'est extrêmement important. Et la sentence est assez grave.
Pourquoi vous ne touchez pas à l'exemple?
Juste une
Yeah, on that hate crime offence, if you could just clarify, I mean, it comes with a potential penalty of life imprisonment. Could you just clarify for us how that would work? I mean, what kind of offences do you envisage could carry that kind of offence? And are you saying that it's no longer an aggravating factor, that it could be a standalone offence? But could you give us some examples of that?
Okay, so in terms of the second part of your question, we're not eliminating the aggravating factor.
Right.
But what we are doing, it's a little bit easier for me in English, what we are doing is creating a freestanding hate crimes offence, which touches any possible delict or crime under the Criminal Code of Canada. And I think what is important about it is that it gives the police and it gives prosecutors more flexibility in terms of contemplating this aspect on the front end of their deliberative exercise, on the front end of how they will conduct their prosecutions. Very importantly, this does not require AG consent. The other hate crimes components, promoting genocide, willful promotion of hatred, things like the anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial offense, require the Attorney General's consent, as does the peace bond that I just mentioned. This provision is something that can be laid it can be initiated on an arrest warrant by a police officer and continued by the Crown, absent the consent of me or a provincial Attorney General. That is very, very important in terms of giving more tools to law enforcement, but secondly, it's important for denouncing what we are seeing right now. And that is critical. Everything you've just heard from people like Carla, everything that I have heard over the last year is that hate is on the rise in this country. We need to be providing more tools, not less, to denounce the hatred that we are seeing, and this will do exactly that.
How do you envision, I'd like to understand how you envision setting up this new digital services office, ombudsman, commission, and keeping the partisanship out of it. Because some critics will automatically say, well, this is the government. The government gets to pick who's going to be. It's going to be David Johnston, the special rapporteur, all over again. What are you going to do to forestall that and deal with keeping partisanship out of this?
No, thank you, Stephanie, for the question. I think it's important. So it's a digital safety commission, it's a digital ombudsperson, and it's a digital safety office. So there's three sort of components here. But what's really critical is that they're going to have expertise. They're going to be able to deal with this in a dynamic manner. The internet is constantly changing. But very importantly, to your point, I know that we need to both establish this, but we need to have Canadians confident in how it's going to work on the ground. And what we've specifically entrenched in the bill itself, I'd urge you to look at it closely, is that the chair of that commission, the head Digital Safety Commissioner of Canada, will be decided in the chamber that is right below us. It'll be voted on in Parliament, in the House of Commons, and in the Senate. We want Canadians, through their representatives, to have a say on who that person is, to have confidence in their ability to execute that function. It is a critical function. I appreciate that. We are being very careful and measured in how we are approaching this and how we are working to ensure Canadians' confidence in that. If there are other measures that work towards enhancing Canadians' confidence in this institution that's being created, I hope that comes out in the parliamentary debates, in the committee study, in the Senate's work on this bill. It is critical that we get this right and ensure that confidence.
Minister, is this new standalone hate crime is that enough? Does there need to be more help for more support for law enforcement to tackle this sort of thing?
I think we always need to ensure law enforcement has the assistance to do this. There's a person behind me, Mohammed Hashim, who's right here on the right, and he has been doing incredible work with the Canadian Race Relations Foundation on just laying out what constitutes a hate crime. There are hate crimes units among certain police forces in this country. In my view, there are not enough. What is critical in this legislation is that we are also entrenching a definition of hatred, which is critical. People say to me, well, Minister Virani, where did that definition come from? Is that something you guys just developed behind closed doors? Categorically not. That definition of what is hatred, what arises to the level of hatred, comes from Supreme Court jurisprudence that dates back to 2013 and cases before it. The Supreme Court has outlined that what we are talking about is detestation and vilification of a person or a group. We are not talking about stuff that some people call awful but lawful. There will still be humiliating comments. There will still be offensive comments, insults, expressions of disdain and dislike. There's a lot of stuff that is out there that will remain out there. But when people arise to the level of detestation and vilification, law enforcement, and they asked me for this when I was consulting on this literally 3.5 years ago as David Lemaity's parliamentary secretary, they said we need clarity on the definition, as well as some of the things that you're asking, that you're putting on the table. What they also said to me is that prosecutions take time. So I'm being very candid with you. There are people that will pursue that criminal remedy, but for some people, Some of the people that are right behind me, like Jane, who you just spoke to, what they want is for the material to just come down, right? They just want that stuff off of the internet. What we are doing is at the same time, we are addressing Canada Human Rights Act tools, criminal code tools, and tools through the new Digital Safety Commission that will help get this material out of public circulation, which is desperately what people need, especially our children.
L'exemption religieuse, pourquoi vous gardez ça dans le code criminel? Ce sera toujours possible de faire un discours haineux avec l'exemption religieuse du code criminel. Il y a 2 projets de loi du Bloc québécois actuellement qui sont déposés pour faire disparaître l'exemption religieuse. Pourquoi vous gardez ça? C'est important de garder le discours haineux si c'est motivé par une raison religieuse?
Donc, ce qui est important de souligner, c'est que ce projet de loi touche les pénalités et les sentences, les pénalités pour la durée des crimes concernant la haine, mais ça ne touche pas les défenses de tout. On est tout à fait au courant concernant... ce que je viens de mentionner, c'est que on ne touche pas les défenses pour les aspects-là. On va étudier le projet de loi. On va étudier le projet de loi de M. Blanchette qui est maintenant devant la Chambre.
La question?
You've removed hate speech as one of the categories of content. So to Stephanie's point, how are you going to be you're not going to be regulating that because you've just taken it out of the 7 categories of content that you're going to be regulating social media companies to police.
So what I'd say to you is that there are 7 categories across the board that constitute harmful content. That is incorrect. Content that foments hatred is one of the 7 categories. Okay, but to your point, Stephanie, that is not one of the immediate takedown provisions. That is correct. But there are still aspects that empower users. I'll give you some of them. Okay? If you are affected by what you think is content that is fomenting hatred, that meets that definition, what you can do is you can flag that content to the platform. One route. Second route is you can flag that content to the Digital Services Commissioner, and they can seek some response from the platform. The third route is that the platform, pursuant to this legislation, is going to implement a digital safety plan that talks about risks that are out there, what we're doing to reduce those risks, and they're going to be held accountable for what they are doing or not doing to reduce those risks themselves. If there is a situation where they're not abiding by the rules that they have set up for themselves, they can be subjected to penalties, and the penalties are significant. You heard me just touch on this in my comments. Those penalties touch as high as 6% of global revenue or $10 million, whichever is higher. That is a significant message to the platforms in Canada that their profit imperative solely cannot drive what is happening in Canada any longer. Safety has to be part of the equation, and we will ensure it is through penalties of that nature. Thank you very much.